Good morning, grade nines. Hope you're going well. As always, I am sorry I'm not there with you. It's not ideal giving you an assignment and then not being there to take the questions and answers face to face. I don't like it. You probably don't like it heaps either. My apologies. We'll do the best we can. So, what we've got here is an example essay. So, I've set you an essay in which you need to take one of the lessons from Animal Farm, discuss how that lesson is shown in Animal Farm, and then kind of apply it to the real world, how that lesson could be of use to us here in the real world. What I've done is I've written an example essay with a lesson from a story and applied it to the real world. But like I've said to you before, I often, as a student, I found it annoying when teachers would give you an example and it felt like the example they gave you was exactly what you planned on doing. And so it kind of felt like they stole your ideas. So I've changed it. Instead of doing it on Animal Farm, as you are doing, I chose the story of Hansel and Gretel. Hopefully, we'll know that one there. If not, you'll get a quick overview in my essay. And the lesson that I chose to pull out of that text was don't trust strangers. Don't trust strangers. Don't trust strangers. You, of course, will choose a different one. For example, Beware the Mob or one of the other 5 or 10 that we've talked about there. So I've written an essay with exactly the same requirements as what you've got, okay? So exactly the same thing that you're doing in your essays about Animal Farm and the lessons from it is exactly what I've done here, but with Hansel and Gretel and a different lesson. So the way I write, the way I apply the lesson from the book to the real world will be exactly the same sort of thing you're going to do. So I really hope it's useful for you. Um, Feel free to send me emails with specific questions about it if it doesn't make sense, but hopefully this is going to be useful. What we're going to do, and this will take, I'm not sure, some minutes, what we're going to do is run through my entire essay. It's about 530 words or so. And I'm just going to talk you through what I've done and hopefully bring some things to life there for you. All right. First of all, I'm just going to make you aware of these things. Now, I understand that your relief teachers should have put these in front of you various times over the last few lessons. These are the sorts of things that are going to form the backbone of your essay. So if you don't know the answer to these things, then you're going to be in struggle town. So you want to make sure you've got a good idea of all these things here. So how was the lesson shown in the text? So how was the lesson shown in Animal Farm? What was the cost of not learning this lesson within Animal Farm? And how the animals could have applied that lesson. So if they had known that lesson, if they were wise enough, what could have they done to change that? Down here, same thing, but in the real world. How the lesson is shown in the real world, what the cost or the potential cost of not learning this lesson in the real world could be, and how can we or should we apply this lesson. So you need to have good answers to all those things clear in your mind or in your planning before you start writing. Otherwise, you're going to be writing stuff without purpose or direction. What you'll notice is that my essay follows this structure either explicitly or just kind of implicitly as we go through. A couple more things before we get into it. A couple bits of vocabulary I thought I'd make you aware of before we get into it. Didactic. The word didactic means intended to teach. So if someone did something didactically, they did that in an attempt to teach. Ubiquitous, we're probably familiar with already. That means found or appearing everywhere. Obsequious is a fun one to say. It means excessively groveling, suggestible, or a doormat. If you think of often villains in Disney films will have an obsequious right-hand man. I think the guy in Aladdin is particularly obsequious. I can't remember. I'll watch some Disney for homework and get back to you on that one. All right, so obsequious, excessively groveling, suggestible, a doormat, just does whatever someone else wants them to do. Okay, let's get into it. So it's an essay. So you want to have an introduction, you want to have body paragraphs, and you want to have a conclusion. What should an introduction do? We've talked about this before. What you should do is kind of harken back to what we learnt about in our formal poetry analyses. If you channel the sort of vibe you were going for in those analyses, doing a similar sort of thing here will hold you in good stead. So an introduction should give the context. What that means is the background information. What does the audience need to know so they can fully understand your essay? So they need the context or the background information to the text, so to Animal Farm, or in my case, Hansel and Gretel. So you can say stuff like, Animal Farm was a pivotal text written by George Orwell in the 1940s, and give us, one or two sentences talking about that. Also, you can give us context to the lesson. So if your lesson is Beware the Mob, you might want to, in your introduction, give us a quick overview of some times in history where the mob has done some bad things. Or if your lesson is Protect Free Speech, you could, for example, talk about times in history where free speech has been denied and some of the consequences for that. Also, you want to introduce the main idea of your essay. So when someone reads your introduction, it needs to be clear to them what your essay, the thrust of it, where it's going, what's the point of it. So the main idea of your essay. And introduce your big points, your paragraph topics. Now, with your poetry analyses, you did that pretty mechanically. What I mean by that is you would have said something like, the text uses the following techniques: metaphor, tone, imagery, etc. Now, there's nothing wrong with that, and if that's how you'd like to go about it, go for it. But when I write, I like to write in a bit more of a flowing manner, and so you'll notice that when I've written my example here, I've kind of done it a bit more subtly, a bit more flowing, a bit more mellifluously, and you might not notice it as much, but it's still in there. Cool, let's do it. So, my example talking about the lesson of Don't Trust Strangers, how it applies to Hansel and Gretel, and how it can apply to us here in the real world today. Here we go. Modern Western society has developed over millennia. Granted, it has learnt many seemingly simple lessons the hard way, but amid the tumult and chaos, we've inherited one of the best collective and individual codes of ethics any civilization has ever enjoyed. So here's my context, talking about lessons and ideas and stuff. One of those lessons passed down through our culture is not to place an unreasonable amount of trust in strangers. This lesson is effectively displayed in the ubiquitous and didactic tale Hansel and Gretel. This text shows the potential harm caused by this text shows the potential harm caused when too much trust is placed in an unknown person. This lesson is as relevant to us today as when the text was published in 1812, coming from Wikipedia, and perhaps more so due to the increased global population of 7 billion and the ease of which people can meet each other due to the internet and improvements in travel. The lesson, though at first glance potentially simplistic, is one ignored at great peril and should be heeded by children and adults alike, today and always. Okay, let's just pause there. So just from reading my introduction, you've got a good sense of where my essay is going to go. You've got a good idea that I'm going to be talking about Hansel and Gretel, how that talks about the idea of not talking to strangers. You know that I think talking to strangers is still relevant, not talking to strangers is still a good lesson for us today. And you've got a bit of an idea of some of the big topics I'm going to be talking about. So, increased global population of 7 billion, internet and improvements in travel, these sorts of things. You can expect these to pop up in my paragraphs later on. Now, this is what I mean by saying you don't necessarily have to introduce them mechanically. I haven't said this essay will talk about, and so on and so on. Now, you can if you like. There's nothing necessarily wrong with that. I just like it to flow a little bit more. Cool. So that's my introduction. Let's get into my first body paragraph. And again, I want you to notice how it follows these things here. So again, you need to know the answer to these for your text and for your lesson. Also, you remember formal paragraphs have got a particular structure. You don't just write stuff. You want to write it in a deliberate way. You want to have a topic sentence. You want to have an evidence/example and a discussion. And also, you want to have a linking statement. Now, what I will say is that these two here, I always talk about them in this order, and I probably always will. Um, but to tell the truth, if you want to flip them around, if it makes sense for your paragraph and for your essay to do it in a slightly different order or to chop and change it, that's fine. And what you'll notice is that the more you write and the more familiar with this stuff you get, the easier you do it and the less you think, and you can break the rules because you know how to break them properly after a while. Let's quickly recap what each of these do. Topic sentence is a quick, short, sharp, shiny overview of what your paragraph is going to be about. So I should be able to read your topic sentence and know what your paragraph is going to be about. For example, the danger of trusting strangers is shown in dramatic fashion in Hansel and Gretel. So just from reading that, I already know that this whole paragraph is going to be talking about the danger of trusting strangers and how it's shown in Hansel and Gretel. Really good, simple topic sentence. Same thing down here. My topic sentence. Similarly, in the real world, we should not be too trusting of those we don't know well in both our face-to-face and online interactions. Just by reading that topic sentence, you know that that whole paragraph is going to be talking about the real world, not being too trusting we don't know, face-to-face and online. Cool. Evidence and example, that's where you prove your point, kind of. That's where you show me the relevance of it. That's where you show me a hard example if you can. And particularly if you're talking about free speech and stuff like that, getting a real good solid example will be really useful. You'll notice here that I've got quite a lot of purple, quite a lot of evidence/example. And I've got comparatively little discussion. Now I've got just enough. Here is better than here. If you're going for really high grades, the more discussion you have, the better. One of the traps people often fall into is they just recap the story. So for example, they'll just tell me the story of Hansel and Gretel. And I'll be like, yeah, cool, thank you. If I wanted that, I would have gone and read Hansel and Gretel, which I do most Saturday nights because let's face it, I'm a party animal. So if you want to get some really good grades, you need to think really carefully about, okay, what's my point? What's the discussion? I've shown you all this stuff. Why is that important? Why do I care? So discussion should be seen as, why is this important? What's your point? So your discussion is where you say, hey, this is a big deal because. And finally, linking statement. That's where you bring it back. That's where you remind me of how it relates to our overall topic, which is all about our lesson and how it can be applied in the real world. It's kind of like a little wrap up and linking it back to our main idea. Topic sentence, evidence example, discussion, and a linking statement. Let's get into it. So I've just had my introduction. Here's the first body paragraph. The danger of trusting strangers is shown in dramatic fashion in Hansel and Gretel. It features two children of that name, a brother and sister, abandoned in a forest by their parents who fear the entire family will starve if they don't sacrifice the pair. Lost, confused, and close to starving, the siblings meet an old lady in the woods who offers to help. Naively, they accept the offer to enter her house. This decision to trust a strange lady in the forest almost leads to their deaths, when Gretel is forced to be a servant and Hansel is locked in a cage with the witch planning to eat him when he is fat enough. Though they eventually escape the incurred hardship, they would not have had to endure it had they the wisdom not to trust this stranger in the first place. Instead of obsequiously entering the witch's house when she offered and putting themselves at her mercy, the children could have politely thanked and declined her and been on their way. It is perhaps simplistic and certainly dark, but the failure to distrust strangers and the resultant hardships shows clearly that vulnerable people should not trust strangers. Similarly, in the real world, we should not be too trusting of those we don't know well in both our face-to-face and online interactions. Being too trusting when we meet a new person, perhaps when we travel on a Being too trusting when we meet a new person, perhaps when we travel, on a date, or when offered a ride in another's vehicle, can put us in real physical danger. There are a few ways we could know. There's some sort of mistake there, my apologies. There are a few ways we could know the quality of a driver who kindly offers. I'll change that. I'll start from here again. Being too trusting when we meet a new person, perhaps when we travel on a date or when offered a ride in another's vehicle, can put us in real physical danger. It is unlikely we could know the quality of a driver who kindly offers a seat in their vehicle, and though they may have genuine intentions, this does not guarantee a safe journey. For example, in Australia in 2017, there were 1,223 deaths caused by car crashes. That comes from the Australian Department of Infrastructure. This does not include serious or minor injuries. Driving is dangerous, and many people have crashes. With so much at stake, it is worth taking reasonable measures to ensure the person you are travelling with is committed to safety. And without this assurance, it is worth distrusting strangers and not accepting offers to travel from them. This is my conclusion now. Therefore, in 2008 and beyond, it behooves us to remember the potential high costs of trusting strangers. If we care about healthy and safe lives, it would do us well to stay out of the sweet candy houses offered to us by witches and charming chauffeurs alike. Down here I have my references. I would like you to do that also. I'm pretty flexible on exactly what you put in your references. Just put the website where you got it from and then put the link to that website so I can check it out, please. Okay. A couple things to point out. Very often people ask me what sort of grades would I give my examples, and I'm happy to let you know that here. So, for a grade 9 essay, the writing quality here would have to be 100% or above. But I wouldn't give this particular piece full marks. The writing quality is good, but the content would annoy me if I was marking this a little bit. And that's because, one, I didn't include everything that I probably should have. So, for example, I introduced the idea of being careful when you meet people online, but I never actually expressed it. If I was reading and marking someone's work, that would annoy me, and I'd mark you down for that. Also, it's probably a really, really relevant lesson in our world, and failure to talk about that would be a problem. The reason I didn't do that is because I'm short on mainly energy, really. Short on energy, short on time, and I think you probably get the main thrust of how I want your essays to go with just doing those 2 paragraphs there. Also, in yours, I'd like to see a bit more information on how we could apply those lessons. So if protecting free speech, for example, is really important, I want you to give me some good in-depth ideas of what we can do to actually do that. Now, it's a little bit hard to do that with mine because my lesson was a little bit simple. I could have done a bit more, I guess, but telling you how not to get in cars with strangers would be pretty dull and pretty boring. Whereas protecting free speech, how you can resist the allure or the influence of the mob, I want you to spend a lot of time on those. And that will come back to your discussion, the yellow bits, and that'll make it more sophisticated and will get you better marks. But more importantly, it'll help you hone your thoughts, become better writers, better thinkers. Keep formal. I didn't check, but hopefully I didn't use any contractions in there. Obviously, contraction is something like don't as opposed to do not. In essays, in all formal writing, you don't want to do that. You want to keep it full words there. Okay, I really hope that helps you, grade 9s. Again, I know that it's not perfect, not being there in person, but I do hope this helps. I'll make this available on Sector, so you can look at, go through in detail and look at this. This video is on YouTube, you can watch it anytime, and I do encourage you to do that. Yeah, just reading people who can write effectively, especially if it's honed towards your assessment, is a really useful thing to do. With your topic, sentence, evidence, example, discussion, and so on, some of you are very good writers, and you would be able to write paragraphs that flow well without thinking about that. If that's you, you have my permission just to write without mechanically thinking about topic, sentence, and so on and so on. Because chances are you've practiced enough and you're able, and probably you've read enough as well, and you're able to actually write coherent, logical, flowing paragraphs without having to go through that process. However, if you're still getting the hang of this, I really want you to actually think, okay, what's my paragraph about? Okay, cool. What's the topic sentence that I can actually write for that? Actually go through that process. I know it'll take a little bit longer and there'll be the temptation there just to start writing, but trust me, you will write better, I will give you better grades, and people will enjoy reading your work and you'll communicate better if you practice going through this process first. Think of, I don't know, help me out, soccer people. Who's one of the famous soccer player, or football as you call him? Ronaldo. When Ronaldo kicks a goal above someone's head and does a flying scissor kick and a triple backflip and it goes in the top left corner of the net after bouncing off 17 people's heads and twisting just at the right time, he doesn't really think about that because he's a genius. But if you were to teach me how to kick a soccer ball, you'd need to say things as basic as, all right, Mr. Grieger, don't kick it with your shin. Try to use your foot and use the inside of your foot while you're there. And I'd have to think about it because on the soccer field, I'm an idiot. We all need to start mechanically. So when you start doing this, when you start writing, I want you to actually think about those little basics. There'll come a time where you can just write without thinking, but please, please, please think about these mechanical parts of how you write. If you're not confident, do start with these things here. All right, I think I've talked enough. Please do send me emails if you are confused or struggling. Go back to this replay, have a look at it. I really do hope to see you soon, grade 9s. It's not sitting well with me being away from you for so long, especially leading up to exams where you got assignments and stuff, so my apologies, it's not ideal. Cool. Farewell, good luck. I'll see you all soon. Catch ya.